Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
Hey guys, it's Lawrence and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, where it is my job to talk to the experts to perform a detailed analysis of their exercise routines, diets, morning rituals, habits, meditations, business tactics, life hacks, etc., to make you more productive and successful in terms of your own health, business, and lifestyle. Corporate Warrior is known as the #1 podcast for high-intensity training. That is a form of strength training popularized by Arthur Jones in the 70s and 80s, and has since expanded to talk to guests about how to optimize lifestyle, health, and business. Former guests include high-intensity training experts like Dr. Doug McGuff, David Landau, John Little, James Fisher, James Steele, and big-time health and fitness gurus like Mark Sisson and Steve Maxwell, and productivity gurus like David Allen and Tom Church, and many, many more. My next guest is coming on for a third time, and that is strength training veteran, speaker, and new entrepreneur Skyler Tanner. Skyler holds a master's degree in exercise science, and now he owns a one-on-one strength training facility called Smart Strength. He's a lecturer. He's been a fitness and nutrition coach for over 18 years. Going back to lecturing, he's lectured at some very well-known events such as Paleo FX, in 4 years running, actually, 2012 all the way through 2015. He's also lectured at 21 Convention and the Ancestral Health Symposium. Skyler's very, very sort of popular online as a source of health and fitness knowledge with a real strong sort of scientific underpinning. And this is an excellent interview if you're keen to understand from a scientific perspective more about how to build maximum muscle mass, strength, and improve your overall health. It's also mega useful if you're a personal trainer who's running their own business and perhaps you're new, or in fact maybe you've been doing this for some years, since Skyler shares a ton of learnings that he's had since running his new business, Smart Strength. So in this one, some of the things we talk about include how did Skyler start the business, why he's doing it, his goals, his biggest challenges. We talk about the ARX machine in his facility and how he uses that for his clients. We talk about how he approaches fat loss for his clients. And then we do, as always, go off into tangents into exercise. We talk about barefoot running, the type of shoes we should be wearing. We talk about the type of footwear that you should wear if you're playing basketball, but you also want to still look after your posture. So it's pretty niche from a footwear point of view. And we even talk about things like body blades and how Skyler has deviated from the classic high-intensity training paradigm in his business and for his own training. At the end of this episode, I mentioned a brief survey that I would really appreciate if you could complete. It's going to be very short and designed to allow me to understand more about you, what it is that you are looking for, what you're interested in, which will really help inform the future of this podcast. So the link to that will be 15minutescorporatewarrior.com/survey. For all the show notes and links, they'll be in the usual place on 15minutecorporatewarrior.com, or just search corpwarrior.com and that'll redirect you. And if you search Skyler Tanner in the search box, it'll be the most recent episode that pops up will be this interview. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with the one and only Skyler Tanner. So I guess it'd be good to start just talking about business. I'm really interested, obviously, in business in general, and love what you've done, love the website, love the blog. I was all over it today, just checking it out. So tell me, I want to start with the why. Like, what was the motivation for you? Why have you decided to start Smart Strength?
Sure. So, I've been I'd been an employee with Efficient Exercise for about 12 years, and over the course of that time, I'd moved here in 2004 to Austin, Texas, to help grow Efficient Exercise, and it was a small, kind of super slow, high intensity training facility, a lot of super slow systems stuff, some old Nautilus, some MEDX, kind of that stuff. And this room I'm in that I've been training people out of for 12 years, that was the third location of Efficient Exercise. It and a location about 30 miles north of here opened about the same time. And so the crew at Efficient Exercise is great. And as that Efficient Exercise and at the time we developed, I sort of put Mark, who started Efficient Exercise, and Randy, who had the sort of patents on the technology for the ARX, together all these years ago. And then that meeting germed into ARX, and so then it became more and more on the development side of ARX, and Efficient Exercise kind of took on started integrating more and more, not necessarily high intensity training kind of principles, and moving more towards a kind of a sporting population. It seemed like that which isn't entirely true, because there's plenty of people who have been with Efficient Exercise for a very long time, and they're not like white collar type A lawyers. But it seemed that the model changed to be all around ARX, and that's great. Like, if you are going to grow a business from a volume perspective, some amount of standardization needs to be necessary. And frankly, it's hard to get the type of people on board who want to do high intensity training, as whether it's kind of like the pure model of a RenX or even Doug is more kind of philosophically high intensity training rather than application. Like, work them hard as hell, don't hurt them, and then don't worry too much about time under load as a standard in the long term. Just get them the failure and don't hurt them. And or the Doug Hollands of the world, who use it as a general strengthening for powerlifting. Has been doing that for a really long time. Is super successful in Shreveport. So backing out of that. So the growth, my mentors were always kind of single studio or a number of small studio with this stuff, and really kind of, if you could think of almost like the doctor who's hung his shingle and just practices. That was kind of the thing I wanted to eventually get. And so the motivation became, how can I take all the stuff I know about high intensity training, my graduate degree in exercise science, and kind of apply it the way I want to, without the disagreements are good, but when you're presenting a business model, you need that internal continuity to make sure your product is consistent. And I felt like what I wanted to do was starting to go in a different direction than where Efficient Exercise wanted to go. Right. And so when I talked about this, I bought this facility from this arm from Efficient Exercise. So, Yeah. So it wasn't like this was some hostile takeover, or it wasn't without a certain amount of blessing, because it's a testament to Mark that as the owner, and this was generating good revenue for him to see that my next step was actually to leave Efficient Exercise and to basically buy a piece of it and turn it into my own thing, and he was willing to do that. I don't know too many bosses who would be on board with that. Yeah. And so that was kind of the where it wanted to be. It wanted to be, how could I take this high intensity training stuff and apply what I've learned in graduate school and make it my own little brand, but also keep it kind of intimate and have my hands in it on a day-to-day basis. Because at the end of the day, it is what I like doing. I had been trying with these kids, kind of walking back even further. I had a couple internships. I sound a bit like James Steele in this way. I had a couple of internships with some tech startups here in Austin. And I had, as a partner in Efficient Exercise, I was going to try and keep my hands in there, but the day-to-day workings would be, as an exercise physiologist at some startups or things of that nature, and doing some data visualization and predictive analytics. I have a little bit of training in that on a business side, and it was just so bleeding boring. Really? It was interesting, but I picked the wrong data analytics, frankly. There's a whole arm of analytics for health outcomes called informatics, which is, how do you take data, especially health data, and turn it into, or more quickly convert it into patient treatment or risk stratification or things of that nature. But I ended up in I didn't know, and it's just ignorant. you don't know until you know. Kind of a more general business predictive analytics little certificate course, and it taught me a whole lot. Like I definitely learned a whole bunch, but I didn't find that as interesting because at the end of the day, I wake up in the morning, my brain turns on, and I'm thinking about exercise, I'm thinking about applications of exercise, I'm thinking about how I can better communicate the value of resistance training to clients, how I can make that leap a little shorter for people who might be afraid of lifting weights, and the relationships I have. So sitting in a room, a big long wooden table, just cleaning spreadsheets, importing them in the Tableau, and working on creating visualizations, while the end product was very interesting, it just wasn't fulfilling for me.
Understood.
I appreciate it, but it reinforced everything I'd done up to this point as far as, I didn't go to graduate school for exercise accidentally.
Absolutely.
And so the opportunity to take that.
No, that's really interesting what you said, because I remember when I saw you on Facebook get that certification, and I thought, oh, how interesting. He's gone and pursued something of interest, and it looked like you'd taken a completely different career path. But interesting that you explored that, realized it wasn't for you, and then came back to exercise.
I don't think it was useless, right? No. And I think that it could still, push comes to shove, if I was in a situation where I had to get some work, right, at all, or I'm losing the house or something, that could get me that. But fortunately, it was why I bought the business. So that hopefully have to happen.
No, it's interesting because my full-time job is in technology sales, and has been for sort of the last 9 years-ish. And as you probably know, and as a lot of my listeners know, it's the podcast is very much kind of a side business / hobby. Mm-hmm. I'd say more a hobby at this time because it doesn't make a great deal of money. And I was going for a walk with my dad recently, and my dad's ex IBM, 25 years as a software engineer, and my mum, however, was a more of a sales customer services type background. So right. I always felt like I inherited more of her communication skills, skill set and sort of that side of the personality, and less so my dad in terms of his engineering skills. But sometimes I think, oh well, if I dabbled in some of that, maybe I do have some of those gifts. I just haven't revealed them yet. So sure. So I said to him, I'm getting somewhere with this, by the way. So I said to him, I'd be interested in perhaps learning about programming, and maybe dabbling in that a little bit. Something that's interesting to me since it was interesting to him. And he, the first way my dad responded was like, oh, you could go to uni and do this, and then you could get a job. And I'm like, Dad, you're missing the point. I just want to do it for the sake of doing it. Mm-hmm. And like you said, there's loads of transferable skills. They all cross over, and right. There's nothing wrong with pursuing little challenges like that, is there really?
No. It's funny because there's two things. Here we go. Let's immediately go off script. Let's do it. So I'm a bit like you. Let me step back from that. I'm first generation college student within my immediate line of family. Both of my grandfathers on both sides of my family were military. They saw World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam. Well, no, my grandfather on my dad's side didn't see Vietnam, but he became a California highway patrolman and then a pretty successful businessman. But never because of he didn't go and get an MBA. He basically was really good at real estate and business real estate. Like he had bought a couple buildings in San Diego, California, and had medical leases on them. I mean, he was really good with property management as a business. My mom was a model. My dad she was a model who then became kind of using those customer service skills, ended up being this customer relations manager at a large mall in Southern California. And then my father was kind of a jack of all trades, built vans, had a garage, did some woodworking, has insane. My father, if you think I can talk, you have to understand that I am Randy Tanner's son. And so until the king is dead, long live the king. Because I mean, maybe I'm getting good enough now to kind of rattle off. My dad has all sorts of wacky stories about van runs in Southern California and being sent to pick up the cocaine kingpin of San Diego County right after he got out of the pen. Like insane stories, but he doesn't tell them like they're harrowing experiences. He tells them, he just tells them like, well, like me, it'll be like, I'm going somewhere with this. But he doesn't preface with that. He just, it reminds me of this story. And 25 minutes later, you're getting to the point. So none of so then later he built vans, and then we moved to rural Washington, and then my mom had to take up selling cars because he was laid off in the early 90s, and then we ended up in Arizona, and he became like a janitor / plant manager. So quite literally, my mom worked her way up to being an executive assistant at this giant auto mall in Southern California, and my dad was just like super blue collar, and that was fine. But it was, you think about all the ignorance that if you don't have parents who've been to university, you don't know. You're like I had no idea. You didn't necessarily have to have gone to undergrad in a specific discipline in order to end up going to graduate school. I thought it was this like linear path, like you're just piling it on. You're not switching gears necessarily, or that there wasn't some amount of leveling coursework that you could take. I just didn't know to ask. I literally was ignorant in the truest sense of the word. And so my mom's customer service skills, that's where it is. And my dad is able to talk to anybody. Like his personable skills were just enormous and continue to be. So that kind of is why this ends up fitting really well for me, because you come to my space and I could talk your ear off and communicate and be really comfortable with heavy emotional subjects, because training people as long as I have, I've seen people through deaths. Really? I've had clients like commit suicide. Jeez. I've had clients. I see them 3 days before Christmas here, and they're fine. They're handing me a bottle of wine. And then Christmas Eve, they end up having like throw a massive clot, go comatose and die, right? Like you go through serious shit, because as a trainer, if you're good, people stay with you a long time, and you're going to see them through life events. And if you're not comfortable with that closeness, you're in the wrong business, because if you're making a difference in people's lives and they've gotten strong, because you can't bank this stuff. That's the other thing you try and explain. How long do I have to do this? Well, until you die, as a matter of fact, you have to keep training. Because there's no Scrooge McDuck giant vault of saved fitness credit that you can put away and draw from for the rest of your life. You can't work out a lot in your teens and 20s and 30s. Bank it and live off the interest. It doesn't work that way.
Such an odd perspective to me.
The idea that you can't do that?
Yeah.
But you could. Well, they do. No, they do. No, I
mean that they think that they could do that. That they think that exercise isn't a lifelong a habit is odd to me. Very odd, as I'm sure it is to many.
Right. So it's funny. I have one client. She's great. She continues to try and figure out why she's been doing this for 15 years, because nothing else in her life is stuck as long as this has. And she and I have shown her some of these, like octogenarians who are really inspirational, at least to me, because I think the exercise and aging and how anti-aging it is just so incredible and so amazing. And she immediately kind of pitches off like, well, they were probably athletes as a kid. And I'm just like, that doesn't matter. You can't bake this stuff, And sure enough, a lot of them didn't start until much later in their life, which displays the plasticity of us. But it also shows that if you had it, you can regain it. And if you never had it, you can build it. That dabbling in that data stuff was very interesting, because on one hand, the money was very good. And at the time I just had, my first kid, and I was kind of going, how am I going to raise my kid on what I was making as an employed trainer, right? And also I had a non-compete with an efficient exercise. So I would have to leave Austin in order to kind of open up my own facility, and I wasn't willing to do that. So I explored other options, and it was good to actually not have them work out, because here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is really interesting. So going back to Smart Strength and your business, is it for you? Is there like a specific goal that you're kind of aiming for? Is there, I don't know, like a revenue goal or where you want to be with this business and what it is you're trying to achieve? Is that something that you spent some time thinking about and working towards?
Yeah. So short term is not have to sell my house in order to maintain the business. And I'm saying it slightly tongue in cheek, but it's like I said in my response to, I'm not sure I have anything to say other than work harder than you ever have before because you're going to be bankrupt if you don't. We got a loan to buy the business and we're paying it back. And so that means that there's no point, I basically look at the next 3 years and go like, well, I'm not going to take very many days off. I'm going to have to work harder than I ever have before, but it's not hard like academically difficult. The idea that I used to think about hard work or what, people starting small businesses kind of go through is there's a series of known facts that you need to have in order to solve your problem. And very quickly you realize it's not an issue of having the right answer as much as it is this kind of, it's like a chronic radar to potential solutions for any given set of circumstances. And even if it doesn't work now, it might work later. And throwing stuff, and it's like what they say in Silicon Valley, you need to fail fast. It's like, well, if the failure bankrupts you, that's not a good calculated risk to take on. But there's a certain amount of, okay, I tried this, it had a low cost and a decent return. Okay, let's keep going with that and then try this other thing and ferreting out opportunities that you might not have done had you been an employee or so all of these things you could tell it's like there's a cloud and all these inputs and you're kind of going, okay, well let me try this. Short term, it's continuing to pay that off, grow my client base because I basically bought about a half-time client load, and based on what I was training because that's kind of what stuck around here at Westlake. They were all mine anyway. And in the short term, I've probably added since October. I've added 7 new clients. I've had 2 return from just hiatus. I have another consultation on Monday. I have a meeting with a PT on Tuesday morning who wants to have a good gyms to refer people to, basically. Okay. I have a lunch and learn at the end of the month with a cardiology practice up the road. So things I would have never have reached out to or had the opportunity to make the connection for had I not owned the business. So in the short term, it's grow the client base. Work like hell to do that. Get people in the door. Get them, seeing how what we do, this kind of high intensity training, slow motion training with being informed by some of the, I got FMS certified, functional movement screen certified, not because it's good at predicting injury, but it does give me because it's not, there's a number of meta-analyses that show like non-contact injuries are poor. People with high FMS scores suffer non-contact injuries just almost as much as people with low scores. But it's a bit like Doug Holland, who you may be familiar with.
Yes.
Yeah. So Doug, in a previous life, was a physical therapy assistant. And to be able to run people through a quick screen that might detect pain or serious, what Donald Rumsfeld called the unknown unknowns, all the stuff that they couldn't even think to tell you because they wouldn't know how to explain it. That's why you start with a generic routine when I'm bringing a client in, they all start with the same kind of big 5+1, because there's a whole bunch of stuff they can't tell me about how they're going to behave, how they behave as things get hard, weird pains that they didn't know, either they didn't know they had or they forgot, like, oh yeah, 10 years ago I had this shoulder injury. Because it's just they're not thinking about that or they don't think about it. But he, as a physical therapist, he could just run through some of these drills and go, oh yeah, that shoulder pain that you have is not going to affect your workout, right? To be able to risk stratify. A lot of the stuff that I got in graduate school for heart disease, risk stratification, if somebody is even healthy enough to be training with me, or if they need to go get a doctor's note or undergo a stress test. That sort of being able to do a movement stratification, to be able to detect like shoulder impingement or tendonitis, or sharp pain that I don't want laid in my lap as if it was my fault, right? Because they were made aware of it on a machine. So being able to use that as a set of sort of quick and dirty tools to be like, you have shooting pain, we can't train. You need to go and get that checked out by your doctor. I've never had that laid at my. I can't recall that ever being laid at my feet. But to be able to do that, and on one hand, like that's a competency issue, right? If a client is going to respect you if you say, I don't want to train you because this might be serious. I'm not using exercise to treat a medical problem, in other words, or what might potentially be a medical problem. And so that was my reason for getting that. And for some people, it's a bit like Bill DeSimone said, sort of people would come in and go, oh, do you have functional stuff? And instead of saying no and they leave, you use that as a hook, like, yeah, you're going to do it my way, but I've got it. Yeah, it's functional. Quotes. Yeah, it's functional.
God.
So it was like that. It was how do I use that to stratify people, and so being able to integrate that with as part of a more comprehensive screen. Globally, I'd like to see kind of smart strength move into almost a. Here in America anyway, there's these wellness clinics. It's like a catch-all term for all of the woo and all of the land. It's just all sorts of pseudoscience, coffee colonics, kind of stuff that doesn't have any basis in basic science and might show to be true largely through the placebo effect or the treatment effect. I can think of a study at Harvard University where they used sham acupuncture to show how it's actually the person who's administering the acupuncture that heavily influences the subjective experience of pain reduction. If you have somebody who's just gruffly hitting, just using these acupuncture needles that aren't puncturing the skin, people experience some amount of result. But if the person is warm and caring and generally seems like they want you to feel better, people experience an even higher satisfaction and reduction in pain. Well, how can that be? There was no actual treatment administered. Nothing broke the skin. It's because you can't separate the psychological. The pain is an output. Pain is not. There's not like pain receptors that you are turn on, right? So there are pain is an output from your nervous system, and we've all kind of experienced this. That pain is not this absolute thing where we've had a cut that we were unaware of, and it didn't start hurting until it was made aware to us by somebody else. Like, hey, you're bleeding there, and you're like, oh, and all of a sudden it starts throbbing, right? And it was because your nervous system, your brain was not aware of that this had happened. Or individuals who've been in a car wreck and they're adrenaline juiced, and the next day they realize just how much pain they're in. This is where a lot of these movement therapists talk about some of these newer, the bleeding edge PTs talk about their treatment is largely facilitating a placebo effect that opens up the window for treatment. So it takes something to the effect of 1,000 pounds of force, for example, to deform the fascia. No therapist, no matter how much they're talking about, I'm integrating your fascia, is generating that amount of force. But the fascia contains a lot of nerve endings. And when you're rubbing on the body, when these individuals are rubbing on the body, it's creating this afferent feedback to the brain about the state of the area. So if your brain, like your lower back, if you can find it as a great image. Lee Saxby is this running coach in the UK. How do you
spell that?
Lee, last name Saxby. If you go to his Instagram, he has this great image about how your brain sees your anatomy, and it's giant hands, giant feet, giant jaw, tiny everything else. And that's because the amount of nerve, you can pull that up right now while we're talking, the amount of nerve endings in your hand and in your feet and in your face is proportionate to the amount of dexterity and awareness you need. I mean, if you close your eyes and float your hands around, or you don't even need to close your eyes, you can be distracted and you know the state of your hands. You know where your hands are, you know where your feet are. And think about how dexterous your tongue and your jaw have to be with chewing. you think about chewing as kind of this up and down motion, but your jaw rotates, it moves forward and backwards, up and down. Your tongue is navigating food from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth based on how much it's been chopped down or compressed. And generally, you don't want to be hit in the face, right? So it hurts when you do. Whereas your back it may well be dragons back there. Like the amount of nervous system awareness, the amount of nerve endings in your low back specifically is just, there's not a lot. So you have people where they're, in the super slow terminology, they call them motor morons, right? Everything from the neck down, their body kind of ends at their neck, and they're not aware of what's going on beneath that. So anyway, but this is why it's the purview of woo, a lot of these wellness clinics, because but why people also at the same time seem to get results, because physicians in America, especially family practice physicians, part of the reason why they have to be sort of short with patients is because they're being tasked with so many patients. Right? It's really hard to be caring and make a connection, and being able to facilitate some of this treatment factor into influencing outcomes, because even if pain is largely in the brain, that doesn't make it not real. Like migraines are neurologically mediated. That doesn't mean they don't fucking hurt and incapacitate people. Or my father, who gets these cluster headaches, which they still don't know the exact root of, he says it's like having an hour-long brain freeze twice a day. Right. It doesn't mean it's not real. Like, yeah, it's all in the brain, and it's real. So these wellness clinics, there's people go to them because you get treated like a human being. Well, what if you could take the best of exercise and the best of nutrition and the best of some amount of manual therapy and kind of package it in a way that is based in reality? Because at the end of the day, like massage therapists like marry pseudoscience, physical therapists dabble in pseudoscience, they'll date it, and then like physicians will flirt with it when they're drunk. But what if you could kind of take the best of what the manual therapy, because you don't need a lot of manual therapy if you're facilitating a treatment effect, because it's about getting your nervous system to allow a change to occur. The best of high intensity training and the actual good stuff about nutrition, which is, yeah, there's some medical nutrition therapy if you have diabetes or if you have certain actual medical ailments. But a lot of it is education, right? Like at the end of the day, when I ask people how they eat, well, how are your nutrition habits? You might go, oh, I eat paleo. I go, I'm not asking what food you eat. I'm asking how you eat. What are the habits that you use to guide your eating? Like the active process of eating and meal preparation, they kind of look at me like crickets. But if you look at the longest lived cultures on earth, they all eat wildly just different ways. They're not counting calories all their life. And they don't eat like magic superfood chronically, right? But what they do is actually eat slow enough. They practice a little bit of intermittent fasting in some capacity. The original Mediterranean diet studies were done on the Isle of Crete. Okay, great. Olive oil for everybody. Although the confounding variable there is that their Greek Orthodox Church.
Nope. We've lost connection.
These days,
Sorry, Skyler, you I lost you for about 10 seconds. You got to the Greek church.
Okay, so the Greek Orthodox Church mandates something like 200 fasting days a year. They're not water fasts. So it's like, don't eat red meat on this Friday, and you can only have fish on this day, and no food until this time in the afternoon. Like, the point is that you get this caloric reduction by way of cultural norms, because vast majority of the people on the island are Greek Orthodox, right? It's sort of like Lent all year long, as far as, but it's very state. So that's a confounding variable. People are removing things from their diet. Yeah, they're eating generally higher quality foods and more high quality nutrients, and it's hard to measure something that isn't there. They're eating less calories because of this food habit, this eating habit that comes with the religion that the island predominantly practices. So a lot of these habits are like, I'm not the first person to come up with this, by the way. So this is not Skyler's harebrained idea. There's a lot of stuff in the health education literature, and there are plenty of other habit-based programs. But at the end of the day, habits are just tools around eating, and you can take that with you wherever. So if you can improve the way people think about food and the food habits in which they eat, you have better nutrition outcomes. You never have to go on a crash diet again unless you're a bodybuilder, or you're like me where I have cancer in my background. So some fasting, some longer term fasting seems to have some efficacy in humans as far as reducing the likelihood of me developing cancer in the next 15, 20 years.
That's interesting. I want to talk to you about that, actually. Well, not necessarily cancer specifically, but diet. If we've got time towards the end. Now, it's really interesting what you're saying about the Greek diet interpretation, and it sounded like a good example of mistaking causation for correlation. Is what often people do, I suppose, with these sorts of things. Going back to business for a second now. I'd be really interested, and I know it sounds like you're doing fantastic, which is really, really good to see and good to hear. But it obviously doesn't come without its challenges. What have you found to be the biggest challenge so far in growing your business, and how are you working on overcoming that at the moment?
You're gonna need a second job. I mean, at the very beginning, you're gonna need. If I sound like Gary Vaynerchuk when he's talking about and like crush it, you're gonna need something else, kind of near the thing that you want to do. I dropped my microphone here. Give me just a second to plug it back in here. All right. You're gonna need something near the thing you want to do until the thing you want to do is big enough to fully sustain you. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where it is right now. It's I've got. I'm in the process of. I've had a couple interviews for like clinical exercise physiology positions, part time, to shore up the difference, right? So I can make this amount of money, and if we grow at the rate we've been growing, which, to be fair, as much as we grew between October and the new year, you don't normally grow like that as a personal training business because nobody cares about getting back in the shit. It's almost like people hit, at least here in America, here in the States, they hit cruise control and they just stay with whatever habits or even they try and regress, right? Because they'll beg off working out if they had to work out a lot. Obviously, my model, the once or twice a week really works out well to where it's just like, oh yeah, go. We can find time for you. Oh, you're twice a week. Let's just back off to once a week, and I still get a certain amount of revenue from them. And so we grew. I mean, our revenue has grown about 15% in that time, which is great. But at the end of the day, it's still not enough for me to just do this yet. So that was a hard, sort of like, it's like, all right, I bought the business. Off into the sunset we go. Nothing grows as fast as you would like it to. And that, you might be pouring coffee, if that's, obviously I'm not, but I have to be prepared that if neither of these things work out, I'm going to be like getting a job at Whole Foods. And that's a shot to the ego, man. Like the idea of what the fuck? I went to graduate school and here I am, lining groceries up on a shelf. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people. Think back to my parents. My mom worked a night deli job at the grocery store when I was in middle school to pay off some credit card debt. Right. My dad, every summer, even though he had, he didn't make a lot of money, and so he'd pick up odd, like not construction jobs, but like handyman jobs for people to get extra cash. Like they were blue collar, and I kind of thought like, well, fine, I'll go to graduate school, and I won't ever have to do that again. But the fact of the matter is, I do, and that was a tough pill to swallow. Like it's a lot of tamping down. You don't want to shit all over yourself. I should have. I should have had more clients. I shouldn't have had to take on this debt. You end up shoulding, and that can really get in the way of being action oriented, right? This idea of here's what I need to do in the short term, right? Like my dad was a great dad, but the thing I've loved about my job is I've been able to pick my kids up. Like after we're done, I'm going to go pick my youngest son up and then go get my oldest. And the idea, I had to sort of have a little come to Jesus moment with myself. And my wife, I love her to death because she's really good at dressing me down. That's why when you pick a good partner, they can tell you to get the fuck back on the horse in the most loving way possible. They know how to push your buttons in a way that motivates you rather than brings you down. And so she basically had to say, like, look, if you are working 60 hours a week between two jobs for a few years, that means my kids will be in kindergarten. My oldest will be in kindergarten when we're in like a really great place. and he won't remember. It won't be like that. It won't be like the movie where dad's always at work and the son goes off and starts doing heroin or whatever because daddy's not home. But I didn't want to do that. Like, that's the hard part, is realizing that you have to be beholden to the circumstances a little bit more, because you are alpha and omega, right? There's nobody else who's going to pick up the slack in your business and make sure you're still in the black. It's you. I joke, like, when I come to work, like, I'm in blue boots, I've got some khakis on, I've got a thermal on because it's about 1 degree Celsius outside right now.
Oh wow!
And here in Austin now, 2 days ago it was 76 Fahrenheit. So I don't remember the exact conversion, but it was about 40 degrees warmer Fahrenheit. So very warm, and I was in shorts and flip flops. And here I am 2 days later, cold. Right?
How is it so dramatically different?
Because it's Texas. I mean, I will. Here's a great tangent. So growing up in Arizona, you knew that it was always going to be hot, but you knew it was going to cool down a certain point, and that temperatures would be within a certain range. And there was really no such thing as winter where I was living. Texas doesn't care what season it is. It will be hot and humid in the summer. Fall will typically be about 4 days. And then you will get these intermittent hard freezes. And it's because when the prevailing weather patterns shift, there's basically a alley between the Canadian Rockies and Texas. And if you get the southerly winds, it's pushing all that cold air down, and there's nothing to slow it down. There's no mountains north of here. There's nothing to stop it. So you'll get that. You'll get, when they talk about a cold front, like, would you ever experience? You never experienced this in the UK, or maybe you would. But what ends up happening is you will lose. I'm trying to do conversion in my head. You might lose. Here's great. Yeah, you could lose 20 degrees Celsius in a matter of 4 hours when one of these fronts roll in.
Wow.
Like, could you imagine that? Could you imagine going from 20 to 0?
Oh man, no.
No, right. But it happens here because when the weather pattern shifts, you get a huge front, and it's all cold air or it's all hot air. You can have it go both ways. So that's how it can happen here in Texas. So that's the joke about Texas. If you don't like the weather, wait a minute, it's gonna change. And so tangent, coming back to it. So like, nobody's gonna fire me for my dress when I come to work. Actually, that's a great part. At the same time, I'm the only one who's gonna earn revenue because there's nobody else here. So I gotta be at work.
Yeah.
So that one of the things I found really useful is moving away, and Efficient Exercise did this a while ago. That was helpful, and I continued it on. So moving away from prevailing weather patterns and dress. I was saying one of the things that in the business that we stuck with when we started Smart Strength from what we were doing in Efficient Exercise, and you see this in a lot of other personal training businesses now, is like moving to a monthly fee, more like a club. But that fee is not like unlimited use. That fee is really, it's almost like a shorter punch card. Instead of having 10 sessions that you buy with an unlimited time frame or a 20-week, or something along those lines, they're paying at the front of the month for once a week or twice a week, and it expires at the end of the month, barring some extraneous circumstance like, oh, we have to leave town because so and so's brother died. Yeah. Okay, well then we'll make that session up in your next month, free of charge, right? You didn't know that was coming. But I have a head cold and I don't feel like working out this week, even though it's Monday. That's not going to fly. You're going to lose that session. Clients have skin in the game. Most clients, this doesn't matter because they make their appointments. But for some of those who, they're kind of they because of either circumstance or they just have a hard time. It gets them motivated in the beginning, because early in my career, you'd have people who are 10-session punch card that take 15 weeks to get it done, and then they wonder why they get no result. And I go, it's efficient. It's not magic. It's time efficient and it's safe, but you've got to be here on a regular basis to really manifest the results. So that moving to that was good. And most clients are like, fine. So every month, auto charge first of the month, and then by the third, I have this big fat, amount of money in my bank account to cover my expenses, because like everybody else, I have consistent monthly expenses. So it reduces those fluctuations as a business, as far as my revenue. So I'm not, all of a sudden I have 4 clients charged and a big fat amount of money hitting my account, and then nothing for weeks, which is what used to happen when we were in kind of like a package system.
Right. No, I know because you've got like a dual benefit. You've got that payment up front, so you can cover your expenses and your costs, but also you're creating accountability in your client's part, as you're saying,
right.
Ensuring that they are disciplined with their attendance.
And then Luke Carlson, Discover Strength. I mean, they do that. They do a monthly package,
right?
And then MedFit, which is there in Chicago. And there's a lot of places that do a monthly package. They have other options that I actually would look to explore with my own kind of stratifying my menu of services and the way in which I could deliver the training. But I know Luke Carlson and them up at Discover, they have a monthly package price.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
How do you? So this is a question from James Fisher.
So the bear.
Indeed, James Bear Fisher. For those who, is that how it goes, or is it James Fisher Bear? I can never remember.
No, it's James Bear Fisher. James Bear Fisher.
I don't know.
I'd like to know over a pint why that's his nickname.
I have no idea why that. Yeah, exactly. I'd like to know also. I actually went for a pint with with James Fisher and James Steele and Luke as well.
I saw that photo.
Sorry.
I saw that photo.
Oh, you did, yeah. So, and Brendan as well was there. Or Brandon, sorry. Is it Brandon or Brendan? God, he's going to kill me for that. But yeah, that's what, if you've seen on my Facebook, I've got my timeline is all of us at Keyser in London. Before it got shut down. Oh, so sad.
It is so sad, because did that Keyser have like the Kegel machine?
What, the what machine?
The Kegel machine. James showed it to me, and he had taken a photo. Steele. Steele had taken a photo of it in Germany. It was part of their low back treatment, where it was you would do their low back treatment protocol was do the lumbar extensor, which I have.
Yeah.
You do adduction because the adductors stabilize the pelvis, so your lower back has to do less dynamic stabilization of the pelvis, and then this pelvic floor exercise where you would sit on this hump and kind of put the hump up on your taint, right? and then there's a computer readout, and you would do a static contraction as hard as possible, and it would press against this force cell. And I'm kind of like, how do you get men to do this? Because most guys won't get on an adductor machine because they think it's a woman exercise. I can only imagine what they think of the Kegel machine.
Yeah. No, you're right. They do have that machine. It's interesting because I hope that I always, when I was at Keyser, I was doing the leg press most times I attended. So I'd hope I'd get some. And we were talking about pelvic floor, right? Is that
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I would hope I would exercise that part of me with doing a leg press. But my girlfriend used to love doing that exact exercise. She got really good at it. I'm not sure she'll like me saying that, but hey.
No, you just edit that out. Just sorry, sweetie.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it was really good to hang out with those guys, because obviously I'd interviewed most of them, and it's just nice to kind of say thanks and enjoy a meal and a conversation and a few drinks. So that was awesome. And I keep saying, I'd love to in the future take a trip to the States and maybe meet up with yourself and sort of tour around and meet up with some of the guests like Doug and so forth. Would be great.
We will drive your triglycerides to the ceiling with barbecue here in Austin, man.
I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it.
The amount of smoked meat is just incredible.
That sounds awesome. So getting back to my question, so James asked, how do you take academic literature that you read and know so well and now apply that in your business? Do you have to be lenient or flexible with this philosophy for your clients? So you've touched on this a bit already, but would you mind expanding on that and answering that question in more detail?
Right. No, and this is a great question, because this kind of comes into the... This is like you start with the base principles, which is I think Elon Musk talks about this with it's much more of a physics idea, but the idea of instead of being as metaphorical as we tend to be, using metaphors to get concepts across. When you're trying to design a program, you're trying to look at it kind of like Doug did in Body by Science, where you're going, okay, what are the basic science that supports what we do? And you can get to a lot of different outcomes. There are many ways up the mountain, but then, a lot of the research now is elucidating kind of the key principles that you have to achieve. Like, you got to get failure really close. That it's probably not inflammation. Inflammation might be mediating a tiny bit of hypertrophy, but it's just inconsistent. That there are a lot of these things now, like sacred cows, that if they're not being slain, they're kind of being put in the back seat. And so then you kind of transition to the art of the coaching. And it goes, okay, I have somebody who really wants to push heavy things. Okay, how can I do that in a way that, because it doesn't have to be heavy, right? We know that from the McGill and McMahon. Yeah. From the Stuart Phillips studies, it doesn't have to be heavy, and that might be safer from a margin of error perspective. Maybe, obviously, you can't lift a feather a million times and get the same result as lifting an anvil. The range is wider. Ultimately, the range is wider than we thought, as far as being able to get similar hypertrophy. So then it becomes the art, right? What does the person in front of you value? How can you rectify that with the literature and say, like, 6 of one, half dozen of the other? Does it really matter objectively as far as the outcome? No, but does it matter to the human in front of me which choice I choose? Yeah, it's going back to that with the functional stuff. If the person comes in the door because they want functional stuff, I will give them a little bit of what they want, but I'm the one applying it, and they're also getting everything else that I apply. So if I can add some exercise that might be, in the end, a net neutral, use a little bit of more time in the session, that could be used for something else, but then they get all of the benefits of the other stuff, of the actually total body strength training and the bone mineral density improvements and all the stuff that kind of for them have come along when they originally came here for functional movement. Then I think I'm willing to do that, right? Because that's the art side of coaching. It reminds me of what a colleague of mine, or a client of mine, said. He's a physician. He's an interventionist cardiologist, and he talks about licensure. Like, when I was going through, because I was talking with Fisher about this, I had recently gotten this ACSM, certified exercise physiologist, and so much of it was sort of like, okay, how do you measure power output on a cycle ergometer? Stuff I'm never going to do. What is, and a variety of other, like, kind of cardio kind of aerobic exercise modality measurements because of the background of the ACSM, that is relevant for me doing, like, clinical cardiovascular rehabilitation. But on my day-to-day life, I don't know. So the way he put it, he said that there's, because of the way in which medicine is done, and you've had Doug speak for 6 hours on this stuff. There's a lot of stuff that is on the boards that they would never do because of either the patient in front of them or the circumstances in which they have to operate based on insurance or budget, that they would never do in actually treating a patient. So it is technically correct, the board answer, but in the practical application, it's not feasible. Or at least it's not feasible given the circumstances. And so that's kind of, it's like the blood restriction training, blood flow restriction training. Technically correct. Only a scant few people are actually going to get the cuff and apply it because it's so miserable. If you think super slow is miserable, this stuff is even worse.
What is that? It begins with K, doesn't it? There's some tools.
Katsu.
That's it. Katsu. Same thing, right?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Is it really uncomfortable?
If it's cool, it has the pump is the weirdest feeling in the world, at least in my opinion. Like, because you're restricting venous return, so you get this weird sensation. Just the pump is bizarre. It's not that Arnold, it's like coming and coming again orgasm pump. It feels like get this thing off me so my vascular system can work the way it's supposed to. Which the pump you get from strength training is like the way the vascular system is supposed. It's delivering more oxygenated blood at a greater rate. And and as a result, you're getting some trapping in the localized tissue because of swelling. But it's kind of when you artificially inflate that, it feels real weird. It's like it's outside of parameters. Like this isn't supposed to happen. And especially within my window, like strapping on the cuffs, making sure they fit right, giving people it might be time prohibitive. So it's technically correct, but with my clients and my population, I wouldn't use it. I would be unlikely to use it. So that's the challenging part. To me, it's like going back to the patient, are they hitting fatigue? Are they gradually getting stronger over time within, certain parameters? Are they covering all their musculature? Are they being consistent? And are they doing more of the things they would rather be doing? Then if I can take something out of the literature and make it fit within that, I'm willing to try it or use it.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy and way to approach it.
Yeah.
So I had a question from Wayne Thacker, who probably sent me the most complimentary message I've ever had since doing this podcast. It was one of those messages you receive out of the blue and you're almost reduced to tears because it's just so flattering, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had it with your blog and all the great work you've done. And it's just, it makes all of this, sometimes when it's tough to, I guess, maintain a schedule, it makes it all worthwhile.
Right.
Anyway, I get to the question he asked now. So you've just given me a tour and I can't remember, but do you have an ARX at that facility there?
I have 2 ARX.
Right.
I have, yes.
Right, okay. So he said, he asked, do you use the ARX for every exercise, every client? And what other equipment do you have or exercises do you perform with your clients? Oh, sorry, that's the end of the question. What other equipment do you... So do you use ARX for every exercise, every client? And if not, what other equipment do you have or exercises do you perform with your clients outside of that?
So I'll give you the verbal tour that you got with the camera.
Yes.
For everybody. So I have one of the later prototypes of the ARX Omni. I have one of the original prototypes of what's now called the Alpha. At the time, it was called the Horizontal. I have a Nitro, reasonably modified Nitro leg press. I have a Super Systems leg curl circa 2001. I have a MedX lumbar extension. I have a what's colloquially known as a gluteator. I have a MedX dip, MedX chest press, Nautilus Power Plus pullover, which is a plate-loaded Nautilus pullover circa like 1988. I have the Dave Landau approved Strive medical lumbar extension and flexion unit that I'm actually trying to get rid of. If anybody wants it for a song, contact me. And I have a Nitro Row. And then in addition to that, I have some, I've got some rings and blast straps hanging from the ceiling for people who are on to do like slow chins or like body weight type rows done slowly. I've got a trap bar. I have a barbell, both the 5-foot and the 7-foot. I have some free weights. I have a selectorized piece from Life Fitness, and other doodads and odds and ends, a single dumbbell. I've got a pinch block I fashioned out of a 2x4 and a loading pin. I have, which is actually, I have a shin raise. I have what's called the Back Revolution, which is a decompression unit for the lumbar spine. And other odds and ends, like, you can go down the rabbit hole, but I've accumulated a fair bit of, a shoulder horn for rotator cuff work on the shoulder, on the scapulohumeral plane. So plenty of owned body blades. So a lot of stuff.
Do you have any free weights? Sorry, I didn't know if you mentioned like barbells and dumbbells and all that stuff.
Yeah, I've got barbells and dumbbells. I have some clients who like the hip thrust, like the barbell hip thrust, a la Brett Contreras glute guy. So I have a woman, she's like 100 pounds, and she does sets of 12 with like 150 pounds. She's a lawyer, like, just like no big deal. She's one of my great. She's a perfect client. Like, she was a yogi who came to me, and we got her really strong. And now she's just like, yeah, no problem in yoga.
Is her name Amelia Boone, by any chance?
No.
Are you familiar with Amelia, though? Are you familiar with her?
I'm not.
I'm not. She was a guest on Tim Ferriss' show. She is the #1 female sort of obstacle racer, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say female. Apparently, she practically beat all of the men too in one of the races. I think she was it was a mixed race, and she came second overall. But she's also a lawyer for Apple, so it's
nice.
mad. But anyway, sorry, I digress. I interrupted.
No. So yeah, so I have a bunch of stuff. I have found that for a lot of my clients, they see the ARX primarily gets used for leg press, chest press, row, pull down. Like those are the main, even though it can do so much more. And sometimes, tricep extensions gets peppered in there. Certain other small exercises, depending on circumstances, get peppered in there. But globally, what I have found, here's the use I've found with the ARX that I love it for a variety of reasons, but I don't exclusively use it. Number one is that, especially with my older clients, because my clientele, it's like I get the last 10% that they can give. As I've seen over the last year, I have a couple clients. I have an 80-year-old. He's great, and he's been doing this for a really long time, and so he sort of plateaued and minorly regressed over time. And so when he started doing the ARX leg press every other week, starting a year ago in January. And within about 3 months, his leg press weight on the Nitro had organically gone up 10%. And not an arduous 10%. Like he was comfortably handling it, and kind of his behavior was the same as it was 10% ago. And I know he could not have handled 10% more without going through the ARX. And the reason for this, I believe, is, and I posted this in one of my blog posts, how older but otherwise active people are incapable of voluntarily recruiting all of their muscle, or a large percentage of their muscle fibers. I don't know if it's ever been shown that a human can voluntarily recruit all the available motor units that they have. There's normally some sort of gap, even in highly trained athletes. They'll use this technique where they put a hot line on the descending neuronal pathway of like a quadriceps, and they'll go extend as hard as you can, and they're pushing, and then they light up the wire, and the nerves for every motor unit turn on, and there's typically a gap between what the person can voluntarily bring up in force and the force output of this involuntary contraction. But those who train with weights suffered, or they had a force output in their 70s, or a motor unit recruitment in their 70s, like that of untrained individuals in their 20s. What I think the ARX does for these older individuals, even though they're training with us, like there's still a little bit of a gap that just is, maybe it's just probably due to aging. And putting on the ARX, their ability to recruit all these motor units because of the overloading of the eccentric, even if it doesn't do anything for hypertrophy, because these people didn't all of a sudden gain like 20 pounds overnight, which is kind of the Fisher, Steele, and a lot of other people are showing the negatives might not do anything for hypertropry, but that doesn't speak to like bone mineral density, or at least not something drastic in most people for hypertrophy. But it certainly, you're able to generate a significantly higher amount of force because of the way the eccentric works. And because the ARX is like doing a continual 1 rep max, no matter how fatigued you are, I think you probably are able, what you're doing is the inverse of what you get with super slow or high intensity training, where you gradually are recruiting more and more and more of your motor units until you fatigue. This is kind of the inverse, is you start off recruiting everything and you gradually lose motor units because you can't sustain the force. But of course, since nothing's acting on you, you are still able to work and generate effort. And it's hard to explain that to people when they've never done the ARX. They're sort of like, I get it, and it seems hard, but nothing's acting on you, right? So whatever you can push at, you get credit for. And so if you have this huge initial surge, because it's not moving fast, and if you don't jam it, right, all of those super slow behaviors, or those high intensity body by science type behaviors, they bring to the ARX. So you see a lot of the videos, like you can go find Ben Greenfield doing an ARX on the ARX like YouTube, and he treats it like somebody trying to nail a 1 rep max chest press, like, ah! and he attacks it. but none of my clients behave like that. In fact, it's funny because it counts down before it starts recording, and during that time, it's saying, all right, gradually increase your force, increase almost the way in which Doug explains a gradual upload, right? You gradually increase your force until, surprise, surprise, the weight stack starts moving, like you're surprised by it. If you treat the ARX like you treat, a selectorized piece, it's just as safe, but you sort of flip the equation. You start off recruiting everything, and you gradually lose that recruitment. And I think that since you're not letting the metabolic byproduct get in the way, because at the end of the day, that burning, it's what Steele posted about this recently, where it was, the individuals at different weights suffer different amounts of subjective discomfort. So if somebody is uncomfortable with heavy weights, they're not going to miss out on much hypertrophy if they go with lighter weights and they're willing to do it. Simultaneously, if the subjective experience of discomfort at higher weights, which I talked about with my body weight program, is so it's distracting and uncomfortable, then you'll be okay going to heavier weights because the net result is the same.
Yeah.
Some people have a hard time, especially it seems as they age, getting to that point of that true muscular failure. And so by flipping the equation, I think they were just able to access those motor units and kind of beat a dog path to be willing to recruit them voluntarily. And they could apply it to their normal Body by Science slow type sets. But I keep it basically to those 4 movements because of ease of getting them in and out and kind of the flow of my workouts. And I've got a lot of other stuff too. If somebody's osteoporotic, if they have bone mineral density issues, I'll typically do just static work, like short statics early on the ARX, because it's a threshold issue. It's like, can you generate enough force to stimulate bone turnover? And it doesn't matter how long that exposure is, right? It's a sufficiency issue. Did you cross the line to stimulate this bone turnover? Which is why something like the jump training, it's highly unsafe, but has been shown to increase bone mineral density similar to resistance training. And the time under load is paltry, right? The ground absorption time is tiny, but because it's many, many multiples of body weight,
right.
It might be, you might, over the course of doing 3 sets of like 20 drop jumps, they might accumulate 15 seconds of work, maybe. So it's not a being under this load long enough. It's, did you generate enough force to bend the bone a little bit and stimulate the osteoblasts to lay down new collagen, right? So we can do that on the ARX and take advantage of what we try to avoid with the slow reps, which is that bone-on-bone tower.
Is that a downside then to doing things like, because at the moment I'm doing and we'll get into this in a bit, but I'm doing sort of a bodyweight workout with weighted wall sits followed by super slow bodyweight squats. But like you say, due to, if I'm understanding this correctly, due to the reduction in load, perhaps not getting the same bone mineral density benefits that you would otherwise. Is that fair? Or
walk it back though, because these people are already 1 or 2 standard deviations below the mean, below where they probably should be. Now, Doug would come in and say, "Oh, measurement error, blah blah blah," and that's true. But if we're going to say we help improve bone mineral density, then we have to play by the rules of that which we are measuring. So they're 2 standard deviations below where they probably should be. But in order to get there, they had to lose muscle mass. And in order to get there, they had to lose strength.
Right.
Which means that they had to get weak before they lost muscle. They had to lose muscle before they lost bone. You or I or somebody else who is otherwise active, we can generate a lot of tension. And a lot of that tension has to pull through the bone. We voluntarily recruit as much motor unit activity as we can. And that is going to stimulate, at the very least, bone maintenance, right? The myokine feedback and crosstalk with the with the bone matrix is there, and we're not going to lose it for that reason. These individuals they put a paltry amount of strain on their bones for many, many, many years, or at least an insufficient strain on their bones for many, many years. We don't have that problem. Especially you with playing basketball, right? You're definitely getting you're getting impact loading through the bones, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Good point. I'll be playing this Saturday, actually.
There you go.
So again, another one from Wayne. He asked, for weight loss, so it's fat loss, same thing. Do you recommend your clients do something outside of the gym? And any of your recommendations to them?
Yeah, I split the difference between what Doug would say with the active phenotype, because that's incredible. Actually, I should send it to you. There was a study done at UT recently talking about kind of giving some actual lab science to the idea of the inactive exerciser who doesn't have the same health outcomes. I'll talk about that in a bit of a second. First, answering Wayne's question. I do, but that's real easy in Austin. Like, Austin is an active culture. I don't really have to push them very hard to be like, hey, you should go outside and do something. Because like on Saturdays, my wife and we run at Town Lake Trail, which is quite literally there's a 10-mile loop around, they call it Town Lake. It's a river. There's a 10-mile running trail built between a dam and in a freeway here in downtown Austin, and it is packed every single Saturday. People are walking or riding bikes or running, and then along the way there are numerous pedestrian bridges. It's not unlike what I imagine you have in London. But people are chronically there being active. Every other weekend there's a 5K or a 10K, or there's a 100-mile bike ride that people will do for raising money for charity. We're right up against the hill country, which is what it sounds like. It starts to actually have some change in some vertical contrast, and all sorts of trail runs out there. And it's just real easy to be outdoors and having fun. Oh, and we have a green belt that runs through the city that people go down and hike in or swim in, and all sorts of watering holes and natural springs. So I don't have to, it's lovely. I don't have to prod people very hard to get outside and do things that would give them a significant amount of low-level cardiorespiratory activity that might promote a little bit of caloric burn, but also kind of the cellular signaling that all of this weight isn't necessary to be carried, that Doug likes to talk about. That marginal utility of carrying extra energy exceeds the cost of the metabolic cost of carrying that energy. Or the metabolic cost of exceeding...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No. So I was just trying to make sure I got it right. Anyway,
Sorry, Skyler. I was just thinking. I think you're probably coming onto it now. But has there been, and as we know, often. Developments in our understanding of exercise and health come way before the science proves it,
right? And
come out in practice and experimenting. But has there been any sort of, studies or research to actually demonstrate that is true? That actually, the more active you are, the marginal utility of body fat goes down. Has that been shown at all?
I mean, you could make this. This goes to that it's like the causal chain, and it may prove to absolutely be wrong. That there's nothing I have seen, but in the kind of the genetic and molecular stuff, you could make a case that with the myokine signaling and the way it distributes. The way it results in signaling for nutrient partitioning, that's the net effect. It might not be a calculation of, okay, here's this, because at the end of the day, it's true that you don't burn a lot of calories. I mean, you burn, now it's like I'm mixing measurements here, so bear with me, but you burn about 1 calorie per kilogram of body weight per mile running, whether it's walking or running. Like it because it's a distance. It's work. It's a work measure, and that accounts for distance and weight. So it's almost the same. It's a little bit more running, but not so much so that it matters. So it's just not a lot of calories. That's above and beyond what you would burn surviving. So for me, it's what 75 kilos, somewhere in there. It's just not a lot, right? And so, but you also get a lot of this molecular signaling to the rest of your metabolism to lobby for nutrient partitioning towards lean tissue rather than towards fat mass. I like the way I put it to clients with the myokines and the adipokines and all these other signal molecules is like fat mass is constantly lobbying for substrate, for nutrients, for storage. It's not this benign stuff. And in fact, there's a great documentary, a BBC documentary called Why Thin People Are Not Fat. I've probably talked about that before. But it elucidates, it doesn't talk about the adipokines per se, but it elucidates fat as much more than sort of this inert biological storage depot. But the only way you get to lobby for nutrient and substrate to muscle tissue is hard mechanical work with muscle tissue. Having more of it certainly does provide a certain amount of lobbying, but it's drastically more when you do work with it. Whereas there's no like fat work to suddenly drastically increase the adipokine lobbying. That's not true. You would just add more fat, right? That you add more fat and the signal becomes stronger. Right. The adipokine content becomes higher. So that might explain, and this might be elucidated, coming full circle, talking about that study I was saying here at UT. They did a study where they had college men who, of course, should survive everything. In the epidemiology, they've shown that there's exercise resistance. The individuals who exercise regularly but otherwise have these sort of parked in place jobs and aren't moving a lot, they don't seem to get the benefits of exercise at a population scale that those who are active but don't exercise as much get. Oh, okay. But we couldn't tell why. It was always kind of retrospective in populations. So this study, what it did was it attempted to control for the movement variable and the dosing of exercise variable, and then actually take and show a quantitative outcome. And so they had a group of men who were college age, basically act like college age guys. UT, University of Texas, is a big campus. They call it the 40 acres, but it's much larger than that now. And so a lot of walking between classes. So these individuals were inactive no more than 8 hours a day, and they accumulated something like 12 to 14,000 steps a day. I have to go back and look at the actual literature as far as that exact number. I remember the hours they spent sitting between the two groups. So they did that for 4 consecutive days. On the 4th day, they ran for an hour at a specific percentage of their maximum heart rate. The next morning, they had what was basically the equivalent of a nasty, sugary, high-fat milkshake. And then they did blood draws over the course of the next few hours to look at how fast the body cleared triglycerides that rose as a result of that breakfast. Okay?
Right.
And then they did the same thing, same group of guys, and they did 4 consecutive days in which they sat or were inactive at least 14 hours a day. Then they had the exact same exercise intervention on the 4th day at the exact same time. They drank the same nasty sugary milkshake, and they could not clear the triglyceride load. The area under the curve was much less. They in fact had created an instance of exercise resistance. Oh. The net caloric change between the two groups as far as just the inactivity versus the active days was probably paltry, but the health effect was massive. The health outcomes that we should expect from regular training was blunted and significantly reduced by being inactive, which goes back to that point about, kind of the early days of super slow. It'd be like, don't do anything that might compromise recovery. But being a free-living human being means moving, and that moving seems to have, at least if it's not signaling for some sort of change at in the central nervous system, it's at least priming the pump to maximize the utility and the benefits of exercise. Whether this carries over to resistance training, of course, is unknown at the moment, but this might explain why in the Truth About Exercise BBC documentary, why Michael Mosley, who had a nice old paunch on him at the beginning of the study, they have him eat the traditional English breakfast of the beans and the sausage and the eggs and all that, and he has this huge triglyceride load, and then all of a sudden they have 2 confounding variables because they got him moving more because they bring in that goofy doctor in the trainers, or not the goofy researcher in the trainers who explains, like, when you put on the underwear with all the movement sensors in them, that these individuals, they got him taking his calls, walking up and down stairs and all of that. Oh, and by the way, they threw these high-intensity bike workouts at him. He's clearing triglycerides like crazy. And so he may have been really the way you'd have to do it is, okay, we'll have the one intervention where he's totally sedentary, have one where he's just done the bike work, and then have one where he's moving and has done the bike work to see what the difference is. But we're starting to ferret that out, that movement primes the results pump from exercise, and it doesn't necessarily mean huffing and puffing. But if you like moving in your body, you play basketball. I now run with my wife on weekends and play with my kids in the neighborhood, and crawling and carrying and doing all that fun stuff because it feels good to move in this vehicle that I've built over all these years.
Yeah.
Then, yeah. But if somebody doesn't feel good moving in their body yet, then I do, and they've got a bike or a treadmill, or they have to schedule it because they're otherwise white collar and active. I don't discourage it, but I do explain to them that it's much more about what the body sees as a stimuli rather than the calories it burns performing the activity.
Yeah, that's a good way of summarizing it. Just moving on to, well, I suppose we've been talking about exercise, but some more questions on exercise. I got one from a few here from Bill De Simone. His first question is a funny one, and I don't think he certainly didn't mean it seriously, but I wrote it down anyway because it's funny. He said, just how smart is that Bill De Simone guy really? Like, as in, we were going to talk about Bill behind his back in a bad way, which we of course would not do.
No. Bill's great. I mean, and that's part of what it's funny when you tell clients. I mean, Bill's the reason why I have body blades here, for goodness sakes, and why I have that goofy, he does his like unilateral squats on a Bosu ball. I have this super thick pad that I use with clients for a minor bit of instability, which has nothing to do with like, people treat balance like it's a cup. Like, oh, I have some balance. Look here, and you try and explain to people like it's the sensitivity of the nervous system to recruit the muscles that keep your center of gravity over your base of support. Balance is three components. See, going off on a tangent here. Eyes, inner ear, and sensitivity of the nerve endings and the mechanoreceptors in the feet to control the ankle, primarily. Like that bleeds up, right? If you can't control the ankle, you try and control things from your knee. If you can't control it from your knee, you try and control it from your hip. And up the chain it goes, and then you're gradually losing the ability to balance. So strength isn't number one. Strength is independently associated with balance in the elderly. But number two is if I put somebody in a corner and close their eyes on this balance pad and they almost fall over, it tells me we should probably be doing some ankle and calf work. It acts as kind of a feedback loop. And it's all because of stuff that Bill's pointed out to me that kind of, he said it in a way that corroborated some of the stuff I picked up in graduate school. It's like, oh yeah, that's an easy fix. That's an easy application.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Bill's great, and I've loved having him on the podcast, and I love reading his stuff. It's really informed my workouts, and it's helped me understand, how, like, I hadn't even thought about moment arms and torque and in relation to exercises and how you use your muscles until I read his stuff. So it was really, really awesome.
Well, and I tell you, they cover it and they covered it in my graduate or in sort of undergrad kinesiology and exercise science, but it's almost like it's a little abstract. It's sort of like there are these moment arms and on to the next thing. It's not like, here are these moment arms, and the closer you get to the ends, the more you're either loading or distracting or the more you're compressing or distracting the joint. And if you look at physics with a constant of gravity, then we should try to pick exercises in which these line up. They don't go that far. It's not part of the curriculum. Anyway, so Bill's he's the first person. I mean, I'm obviously not as you. I'm sure you've read far more widely on those subjects than me. But are there many people talking about that specific stuff in the detail that Bill is in his books? Because it doesn't seem like it. Yeah, but it's not for the same application. So, or they get to it from a different way. Like the stuff that Bill references, you have to have an understanding of moment arms in rehab. Like for PT, I mean, Brunson's clinical kinesiology talks all about this stuff.
Right. Okay.
But it's like the moment a person is rehabilitated, the handoff goes from these individuals who have this intricate understanding of utilizing, or this intricate understanding for helping to facilitate normal muscle joint function after an injury, and it gets handed off to the personal trainer who wants to have you deadlifting, right? It's this handoff from somebody who's really skilled to somebody who got a weekend certification typically, which this gets into an intrinsic and extrinsic kind of biomechanics thing, because people go like, oh, Mark Ripto in Starting Strength, he covers all sorts of biomechanics, and that's often kind of level against Bill. And it's like, well, what Rip is talking about is like the distribution of forces across muscles as it contributes to a movement for a given range of motion, right? Like what percentage of your glutes are contributing or to like a deadlift at this joint angle versus, at the starting position versus the ending position. That you could call extrinsic. It's looking at kind of the gross muscle contribution to a given movement over a range of motion. The intrinsic biomechanics would be, how do those forces that the muscles are generating impact the joints that the muscles are crossing? And that's a different discussion, right? If you're going to powerlift, you have to deadlift. Right? You just do. There's no getting around it. But if you're training for health, you can you accept the risk, is my point. If you're going to deadlift, you accept the risk of deadlifting. Like you just do, and that's fine. Like as long as you walk in with both eyes open, that's fine. But then all of what you would call support work should then be, at best case, joint neutral, because you understand that this isn't the best thing for your joints. Right? So let's not throw gasoline on the fire. And that's kind of what Bill is talking about, because he, like the clientele are rarely athletes. And this comes full circle to the idea of functional training as a useless word, because let's say you have runners and they're going to continue to run because they do. And they say, oh, I need some functional movement. It's like, well, what the fuck does that even mean? Because you could define a number of ways. Does running require the quadriceps, hamstrings, and glutes, and calf and shin muscles? Yes. So strengthening those muscles is incredibly functional for the task of running. But it's also functional. Is that there's a tendency to pronate, because it's what the foot does, but then you get this knee caving. So doing clamshell or abductor type exercises for running is also incredibly functional to reduce the degree in which you get this knee caving effect at the hip, right? Might it also be functional for these individuals to train barefoot to make sure the sensitivity of their feet for turnover and the reflex of landing is good, so that when they move back into shoes, they're not heel striking aggressively? Yeah, that's functional too, right? So you could, functional is either it means almost whatever you want it to mean, and so that's where things get, when we can't agree on the meaning of words, then we get into trouble.
Just a side note on that, it's made me think about something. So I used to, before I came across high intensity training, I used to train much more regularly, as most of us did, much more, quite intensely, sort of 6 to 8 times a week. And I'd run a lot, and I'd play a lot of basketball, and I'd wear a lot of shoes with heels,
sure,
as in slightly raised heels, as many people do. And I had knee issues. And what I've noticed is, since making an effort to be more barefoot / wearing zero drop, is it zero drop? Is that the right expression? So I wear the Vans that Tim Ferriss advocates.
Sure.
I wear those a lot, and not that they're his. He's manufacturing that shoe or anything. It's just what works for him. And so I try, and I also have the Vivo barefoot shoes as well. I don't know if you heard of that brand.
I have a closet full of them, actually.
Oh, you do?
I'm wearing a pair right now. I'm wearing a Desert Players right now. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. So it's just kind of occurred to me that I no longer have that sort of pain in my knees, which my understanding was that was as a result of having feet that I'm quite flat-footed, or was, and then they overpronated, is what the physiotherapist told me all those years ago. And I used to put insoles in my shoes, which did or may not have helped. But it just makes me think that when I play sport now, and I will obviously put on a pair of Kobe standard basketball shoes with the raised heel, I don't have those problems anymore. And maybe that's because my volume is much lower. I mean, I'm only playing once, maximum twice a week, and the rest of the time I'm either barefoot or in zero drop shoes. Flat shoes. Right. So do you think, well, I suppose I'm answering my own question here, but I suppose that's probably alleviated that knee pain, isn't it? Quite
let me tell you what you just figured out, and you can accredit it to me. Actually, and I should send you the link. There's an article recently that's talking about like foot core, the idea that we have all these intrinsic muscles of the feet, so it's a little 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You had people who were excessively shod, right, just wearing the biggest, clunkiest shoes, and then suffering from a weakness of feet. And then you have everybody go full barefoot, and you're talking to the guy who runs barefoot. Like when I run 5s and 10s in the city, I run barefoot. And that was accidental. I did not intend to be the barefoot guy, but I was trying to run in some barefoot sandals in the rain. My foot was slipping around as either A, I was going to hurt myself, or B, take the sandals off and run barefoot. So that's what I did, and it felt great. Backing up. So then you had people get like puncture wounds, and they were getting this weird kind of suctioning effect as they foot strike, where their feet would spread out at all four corners, and they're getting weird scuffing and scraping, from transitioning too quickly. So there's a middle ground now, which is kind of the global thing that a lot of people end up doing, where they are training more barefoot or finding ways to be less shod and allowing those muscles to strengthen. But then, you know what? If I'm going to play basketball, I'm probably going to wear a shoe that's probably a little bit more like not quite a full basketball shoe like I used to wear in high school with the giant the Nike Airs that were enormous and all of that. Yeah. But I would probably wear something more than my Vivo Bare Feet. It might be something like a Nike Free, where it has some rubber, it has maybe a modest heel, like a 3 millimeter drop. But I would probably end up wearing something like that because I think it's more useful for the task at hand. But otherwise, I lift. I do all my workouts barefoot or in zero drop shoes. And when I run at the trail, I'm in the Vivo Bare Feet. So, and I otherwise spend a lot of time barefoot.
Just on that, I'm interested now. So,
Bill, we're never going to get to your questions.
We will get to Bill's questions. We will. But I have to ask you, because I have actually, I actually played basketball once in Vivo Barefoots, and I was horrendous. I couldn't jump to save my life, and that's obviously got something to do with the fact that, well, I assume that I'm not used to playing basketball in those types of shoes, and it felt really odd. Right. Having been used to jumping in, traditional basketball footwear. So, why do you think that those shoes you just suggested might make you, did you say perform actually better than the traditional basketball shoe, or just prevent the risk of injury perhaps, or I guess poor, I don't know, I don't think it's magic as much as I think about. I'm sure I could play in my zero drop shoes, and I know I can jump just fine in my zero drop shoes. I think there's probably an issue of a little bit more cushioning because of the frequency of the impact, right? Like it's a jumping sport, right? So high jumpers jump in racing flats because they jump once and they land on a pad on their back. Long jumpers jump in sprinting flats because they land in dirt. Triple jumpers jump because it's 3 jumps, right? But in basketball, it's this chronic thing. So that kind of a little bit of cushioning. It's not the drop as much. If I had a zero drop, if there was typically the zero drop shoes also are very minimalist as far as the stack height. So if there was some sort of like Nike Free that offered me the movement and a zero drop, I'd use that. It wasn't 3 millimeter or their magic. It was more along the lines of it's close to what I already use. And I don't know if once you've been minimal for a really long time, any sort of shoe feels really weird. Yeah, absolutely,
really, really weird.
Especially a formal shoe, I found.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I often wear a suit for my job. Sure. But I will wear Vans. Yeah, because especially if I'm not seeing clients, as soon as I'm seeing clients, I'll go the posh work shoes. But yeah, damn, do they feel odd on my feet? And I take them off immediately afterwards because it just doesn't feel right. Sorry.
Right. No, you're right. Exactly. And I just sent you. That's the little bubble you heard. I sent you that foot core article, so you can add that in the show notes.
Ah, thank you.
So it's close enough to what I've gotten used to, but also might offer some of the benefits. I think the line I picked up, I forget who I got it from, maybe Christopher McDougall or where it was something like, when you're strengthening your feet in a training capacity where you have known variables, like on a track or grass or in the gym, barefoot, you're probably okay, right? But then when you're out running or doing something basketball, then you're kind of choosing a shoe for the protection that would actually be a net benefit for the activity. Because that's my thought behind choosing that shoe, or the idea of using a free if I was playing basketball. And also, frankly, I mean, a lot of these shoes, that the rubber is not going to be as conducive to. It seems like they would be slightly less. Whoa! I'm sorry, I'm not sure if that's lightning or a truck. I just heard a loud boom. Yeah. There's or thunder. There's it seems like they're a little bit tackier for the hardwood versus like one of my Vivo Bare feet.
Right. Okay. Cool. Got it. Okay. So going back to Bill's questions. So he actually asked about the body blade. He said you asked for body blade info from him a while back. What made you think in that direction? And did you have a chance to implement it? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I have actually. What made me go in that direction is that I end up with, because of the age of my clients, I've had a number of clients over the years who have developed frozen shoulder, and I'd come across some literature, some things that PTs were talking about with regards to how they were using eccentric loading to increase. They were using not especially heavy eccentric loading, but just repeated eccentric loading to increase the range of motion rather quickly in individuals with frozen shoulder. And so my idea with the shoulder, was kind of almost, when you have this rapid increase in force, the net relaxation effect of the musculature surrounding the joint, like we're talking about the shoulder here, is temporary. It's sort of like it's almost like the performance improvements on the other end. If you wind up and do a very short amount of time on a vibration plate, you'll run the 100-meter dash faster once. You'll jump higher once. So what I was trying to do is utilize the body blade to have this rapid switching of eccentric, concentric, on, off, and then see if that would be permissive to move the arm into a position that the brain and the muscle tissue as a net result wasn't allowing it to go. And then kind of use that as almost, hey, look, you can in fact get there, right? So this was psychological as much as it was biomechanical. Look, you can get there, client. This stuff is helping you. Like your joint will get better because frozen shoulder just takes so long to make improvements. And then in addition to that, all of the or for some stuff, here's a great example. A client of mine, he separated his shoulder years and years and years ago, going over handlebars of a bike. And he can't really do chest press hurts his shoulder. He gets deep, weird shoulder pain. He can do dips, but he tends to feel them predominantly in the tricep. And we can do some slow, unstable push-ups with the blast straps. And the activation is higher in the subjective experience of my chest is working. This is where that art science thing comes in. Because even if it doesn't matter, a client still wants to feel his chest. So I've got to get him there somehow. Even if, he's getting a good amount of chest stimulation out of the dip because biomechanically he can't not. Like that down and kind of in front of you position is going to activate the chest. Even if the triceps are screaming at him because, to quote Bill, feels a compelling argument. So with that in mind, using the body blades to do like a pec deck, he doesn't feel his shoulder and he can feel the chest after doing like a set of dips or doing these blast strap push-ups to the point where the shoulder starts to yell more than he would like it to. And so that keeps them excited and engaged. Like, And when they do it, it seems like, and it could be, it doesn't seem to last, but in the short time after the workout, the shoulder doesn't whine at them the way it does kind of chronically otherwise using the body blade. And I don't have a mechanistic reason for that, that I can kind of tap into. I think it could be that there's some bleeding edge of the pain literature that talks about how most of what like manual therapists are doing, as I said earlier, is facilitating a placebo effect, and that when they're rubbing on you, it's sending all this information back to the brain about the state of the joint. And so maybe what ends up happening is with all of this contractile activity going on and not hurting, then the pain reduces to where in the range of motion it should actually hurt versus this kind of protected, immobilized position that they were forced to heal in, or they spend most of their day, because this individual is a cardiologist, so he spends a lot of his time in doing work, in a very cold room with a heavy lead vest on, helping people to not die. and so maybe it provides that it doesn't hurt because of that. Don't have an exact mechanism as to why that is yet. Pain is just weird stuff, but it seems to help that. And then some of my clients too, where they've had weird rotator cuff things, and I can do some manual rotator cuff work with them, and that seems to be very beneficial. The body blade is just another tool at getting in there and getting some stimulation in something that otherwise you just have, the mechanical disadvantage of doing, like rotator cuff work is enormous, but it needs to be stronger. And Bill knows more than anybody that even if it's strong, you could still suffer problems. So I want to err on the side of being too strong in that way. And the body blade lets me kind of tie that in with some other compound movements, where it would otherwise do work, but you don't want that compound movement to try to target the rotator cuff, quote unquote.
Another one from Bill. How else have you deviated from the classic high intensity training paradigm, and why?
It's a little bit like Zickerman said with you when he was in that interview. Like, sometimes a second set is warranted, and that's kind of like the art and science of training. Or if it's not a second set, it's a second exercise. Sometimes deviating the classic paradigm has been some of that corrective stuff. It seems really weird to say, because I know that that's not correcting, like, it's corrective exercise. It's not really correcting anything, because again, it's correction is an open word that can mean whatever the person saying it wants it to mean. But I found it so hilarious. It's like, there are some people, they should, I'm standing on one foot right now. I'm hitting tree pose right now, and it's no big deal. But you have some individuals where they can get on that leg press and they can push a lot of weight. But the moment they lift one foot off the ground, it's like there may as well be, again, there be dragons there. They just have no idea what to do. It's like their movement capacity is so fragile. And so if for a lot of people, they spontaneously move more and explore more movement, and especially here in Austin, I get a lot of yogis and people who, or they're doing Pilates also, or they're practicing other things that require a wide menu of movement choices. But if they're coming into me and they're osteoporotic, or they have not otherwise engaged in some amount of movement that would be, kind of widen the menu, some of these corrective, quote unquote, exercises helps to move them away from being what the super slow people called motor morons, right? This idea that in graduate school, there's no such thing as a natural athlete. Is great, because if the task is novel enough, you can take some of the most diverse movers and bring them to the totally normal, or even below normal standards. I had a decathlete, a college level decathlete in one of my graduate courses in this advanced motor learning course. And the teacher had us run through, to prove there's no such thing as natural athlete, all of these novel, weird tasks, right? And he finished just like everybody else, average. Some he was way below average, and some he was above average. And by definition, for the track athletes, they're the best movers because they have to do everything, right? But because it was novel, and he hadn't trained for it before, he was poor. Now, he's probably also going to pick it up really fast, because he's shown that he could be proficient in 10 different events to some pretty high degree. the point is that the term, oh, these individuals are motor morons, it was almost like, so don't worry about how well they move. And if I'm talking about helping people have a better vehicle, right? Be better in their body, then part of that is also how well they move, right? And that's a kind of a soft thing, right? There's no, oh, you're 10 pounds stronger, you're 30% stronger, you're lifting this many weight or this much weight. It's a soft skill set, and it's subjective, but they live in their body. Of course it's subjective. So if I can get them being more confident in the way they move and their ability to move, then that's a net win for me. If the exercises I use to get there don't pose a great risk, and if we consider it a waste of time given the physiologic benefits they can get from doing a little bit more high intensity training work, but it keeps them as a client and it offers another metric of improvement, then I'm okay with that. And so coming full circle, I use a movement. I've been building kind of a movement stratification screen. And it's not to try and say, oh, look, you're at this % risk of injury. That's not what it is at all. It's meant to give some clients love the quantitative feedback of the ARX. Like, they just love it. Like, I'm 10% higher. But at the limits of your strength, your performance goes all over the place. It's like a stock. I have some clients come in, they break their teeth off pushing on a leg press, and they finish 10% less on strength. And they go, what happened? I go, you're human, right? Like, it doesn't mean they lost 10% of muscle or anything. It just means that when you sort of, when you've emptied your jar, when you've sort of gotten all the benefits and all the maximum amount of regularly accessible strength that you're going to get, there's error at the limits of your performance. You've drastically generated an improvement in accessible capacity. But I can remember when I was like big fat power lifter, like there were days where, 2 1/3 times bodyweight deadlift felt like I could do it all day. And there are other times where I would barely get it off the floor. And I just couldn't understand it, but I was at the limits of my capacity. Whereas 225 always felt light. It would just come off the ground real easy, no problem. And the ARX shows that in my clients too. So if I can offer them another way, albeit subjective, of feeling like they're improving in a way that seems tangible to their daily life, because they're concerned about balance, and no matter how much I tell them that being stronger is the thing that is going to benefit them most for balance, if they believe themselves to be better at balancing because we do some dopey exercise that has them a little bit on one foot, or they can stabilize themselves with their eyes closed on an unstable pad, they have the efficacy, they have the belief and the confidence in their ability to balance. So they might do more things that improves their movement menu and what they are confident in their movement. So they might not become great movers, but they're less likely to regress in their movement because they believe themselves to be fragile or incapable of doing these other things. Drew Bay talks a little bit about this with bodyweight training, because doing squats to failure is still a squat. And even though we know the muscles that doing a leg press, for example, are the exact same muscles, the squat looks like a squat, and any squatting motions they do away from the gym. So for people who might not have confidence in their ability to move, then that is a little bit it's a little bit more self-referential. Oh, I can do the squatting motion at the gym, so I can do it here at home. Even if they are just as strong doing a leg press or stronger, they might not see it as the same muscles and basically the same movement pattern. So it's as much mind as it is body with some of that stuff. And anytime I can get a client improving without wasting their time or putting them at risk of injury, and it keeps them training so they get the good stuff of the bone mineral density and the physiological adaptations, I'm all for it.
Good stuff. I'm just aware of time, so I just wanted to ask you question that I'm really interested in asking you personally, and then we'll quickly wrap up with how people can contact you and that type of stuff. What does your current diet look like at the moment? It'd be interested in knowing what changes you made and what the current diet regimen is for you, Skyler, at the moment.
Let's see. Right now we're about 18 hours fasted, so
Oh, really?
Which is probably why my speech has increased as all the adrenaline continues to churn. So I intermittent fast based on my schedule. Some days that's 15 hours. Some days it's 19 hours. And it's just because I love eating, and my hobby is cooking. And so it has been for a long time. And so if I have to like eat a shake because I'm desperately afraid, I'd rather just fast. And that is a highly individualized thing. It seems like the minimal effective dose for intermittent fasting is about 13 hours. And then after that, you get into some interesting, the longer you go, you sort of manifest certain benefits, and then there's a point of diminishing returns. And for us on a physique scale, it's the refeeding is just as important as the fasting. I tend to eat meats, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, roots, tubers, kind of the, what would you consider the just eat real food, quasi paleo thing. I don't, try to hit any specific macronutrient ratio or some days I'm very ketogenic. I just want meat. I said my Christmas gift to myself was a 2.5 pound cowboy steak, which is about a 2.5 inch thick ribeye cut.
Lovely.
And I sat down and I said, and I put butter on it and I ate the whole thing. So that day it was basically the carnivore, but, the other day I had like 3 bananas. I had a couple plantains. There was a lot more plant matter and not as much meat. Potatoes. Like tonight I'm going to roast up some potatoes. I'm going to make some fish. I'm going to probably like also roast up some cauliflower. There's going to be a lot more plant matter just because that's what I want. So as I wrote in a blog post a long time ago, I abide. Because seasonally, if you're going to go full on paleo model, which I don't suggest that you do necessarily. But if you're going to go full paleo model, there are some seasons where you're going to have a lot more plant matter than animal matter. Yeah. So some days I'm almost vegan. I just want salad, right? Just for some reason, I want a lot of salad with like avocado and, onion and things of that nature on top. And other days it's just like, give me the cow. And then the fasting. So the fasting is fluid in the same way. Like some days, like I always run fasted on Saturday morning when my wife and I run. So I push both of my boys in this double stroller and we run 3.5 miles. And then typically we go in and get breakfast at the Whole Foods. And depending on, sometimes that's more carbs, sometimes it's less carbs. It's just how I feel. But otherwise it tends to be real food most of the time, so call it sissin. Or call it primal if you want, I guess, if you want to label it. I look at that a bit like I look at, this is where Bill and I have kind of, we've had discussions about it. He's laughed. He's like, oh, Skyler, that paleo guy, but he didn't throw my burger across the restaurant when we hung out and ate together, because burgers are delicious. And occasionally I get myself a damn burger. But more specifically, it's kind of like, I try to be aware, and this is hard. Metacognition is really, really difficult. I try and be aware in which the way I think in one area is so disparately different in another area, and if they can't be more similar. Because sometimes you need different thinking for different circumstances in your life. But to me, the idea of congruent exercise is like, look, here's how we evolved over many, many years to handle loads to our skeleton with respect to our joints when carrying or throwing or moving or whatever. And that the heavier it got, the fewer degrees of freedom you had with which to be safe, right? These loading patterns, I call them, right? And that line of thinking, you would agree. That's kind of like what congruent exercise or moment arm exercise says. Like, here's the safe ranges of motion based on our anatomy and biomechanics. All I'm doing is applying the same thought process to food. We had general foodstuffs we had accessibility to over our evolutionary past. And if you can get closer to that, you're going to more likely be able to have health and vitality. Simultaneously, it doesn't mean there's any accounting. We live in the real world. Anthony Johnson asked me this once. He goes, he just couldn't, he wasn't he was asking like, hey, do you still eat bread? I go, yeah, I bake a mean bowl of bread. He goes, but do you know it's bad for you? I go, well, I know chronically it's bad for me, but I also know humans as omnivores. In the short term, if you don't have an allergen, you might suffer some gastrointestinal distress, and you have to go, is it worth it for that delicious, crusty bread I'm going to make? And sometimes with the butter, and sometimes the answer is yes, of course it is. And other times it's, nah, I'm good, okay. And so that's my internal accounting on diet, because I've certainly, when I was much larger, when I was like my fat powerlifter stage, I say it's about 45 pounds heavier than I am now. I was bigger and I was fatter. Like I think there seems to be something to do with the ability to carry more lean mass at a higher body fat. I wasn't able to have both. With my genetics, it just didn't seem to allow me to do that. If I wanted to be big and strong, I also had to carry more fat. Given my background with my mom dying very young of cancer, that's not a risk. That's not something I'm willing to. It just doesn't fit with what I want out of my life and what I value in my life now. I appreciate it. Like if somebody wants to powerlift and sort of be as big as humanly possible, I can see why that is cool or why that might be interesting, but it's not there for me anymore. That doesn't mean I don't like being lean and muscular and all those things, but I'm willing to accept the limits of that given the lifestyle I also want to live around that.
Just to clarify then, so my understanding is right, so it's basically for those that want to pursue maximum muscle growth, and obviously there are genetic limitations that many of us don't accept or don't understand. You are kind of, if you're overfeeding, is it IGF-1 increases, and you're basically creating an environment that is going to increase the likelihood of cancers growing within your body. Is that
no?
Is that totally misunderstood?
No. Walk it back though. So because I have a risk,
I see.
Think about it like this. And Peter Attia, and there's a great podcast of Found My Fitness where Peter Attia talks about this. It's like high insulin and high IGF-1. At least you have populations that eat a lot more meat than we do and have lower cancer rates. But because they're eating more animal protein, the thought would be, oh, well, look, then they should be at a higher cancer risk because of the IGF-1. It seems that once you have the cancer, then IGF-1 and higher IGF-1 is a potential downside as well as insulin. That it's almost like it doesn't cause it, but if you have it, you're going to want to try and control for these factors. Walter Longo at University of Southern California has done a lot of work on this, from single-celled organisms all the way up to humans. And there's a variety of other very erudite people who are in that field who there's some people who say it's all about the protein, and then there are people who say like it's the protein and the carbs. So with that in mind, I eat enough protein to maintain lean tissue, and sometimes it's a lot, and sometimes that's a little. It's those dynamic variations, as Art Devaney would talk about, because your body is, those proteins contribute to a pool of amino acids. And so I go by hunger, and I go by kind of what I want to eat, as long as it's real food. So sometimes it's a lot of protein, sometimes it's less. I certainly eat less now than I used to, but I probably eat more meat than I think most people would think is healthy. I'm not saying would think is healthy, but I'll probably have a half pound at my first meal, probably have 4 eggs after that, maybe a little bit more meat, and then another half pound of animal product at dinner on a normal day. Sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less, but probably consume a pound of animal product a day, roughly on average. But that's still, if you then do all the accounting, I may be consuming 110 grams of protein on average a day, like way below bodybuilding standards, right? But still, if you look at but still plenty of protein, but just like, it's kind of like enough to maintain my muscle mass and the type of performance I want and the type of exercise outcomes I want. But much less than I did when I was trying to be as big as possible. Because if you're going to eat a lot of calories, you're going to eat all the calories from all the sources to support growth, and then you get fat. Like it's that whole pushing with the rope thing that we talked about in the first interview. Like there's an overfeeding to support the energetic demands of increased training. Yeah, you're probably need to do that. It's going to happen organically, though. There's a point of diminishing returns, though, where it's like, okay, you have enough extra substrate to support the building of this new tissue because it's expensive, but then there's a point where it's just too much because it doesn't a pound of muscle is expensive to build, but it's not 3,000 extra calories a day expensive to build over the course of a year, right? It is more expensive, but not that expensive. So it's more like eat when you're hungry, and maybe don't have this short of fasting window unless you're doing like a Martin Burkhan lean gains kind of thing where he's having you overeat on the workout days because that's probably the time where you're going to get the most out of it.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, so I'm aware that you've got to shoot off 4 minutes ago. So let's wrap up with that. It's all right, sure. Skyler. So quickly, do you want to just run through how people can find out more about you, find out more about Smart Strength?
Yep. So the website for the gym is smartstrengthaustin.com. That's one word, no hyphens or underscores or anything. Smartstrengthaustin.com. You can find me on Twitter at Skyler Tanner. That's SKYLER. You could find I think it's at smart_strength. I could double check that and follow up with you on that, which will in the show notes. And then also I have a personal blog, which is just skylertanner.com. But now a lot of that is it's still, free and available and all that, but there's definitely more of like, hey, if you like my work, go check out my business blog because we need new clients. You always got to keep growing it, man.
No, I love the honesty. And I will just say, and I'm not just saying this, I love your blog. I think your content is second to none. And if I were living in Austin, I would sign up in a heartbeat to train with you. I think, if you're anyone listening, if you're living in Austin or near Skyler's facility, do at least have a consultation because I think it's worth your time.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. So another thing for those listening, I'd love to get your feedback on this podcast in terms of what you like and what you don't like. So, for example, if you think I should bin my cheesy intro or change anything else as part of this podcast, that's something I'd love to know. So, if you want to fill in that survey, go to 15minutescorporatewarrior.com/survey, and there'll be instructions and a link to a short survey to complete. And hopefully, I can then make the blog and the podcast serve you better. Is the idea of that. And for all the show notes and resources for this one with Skyler, go to corpwarrior.com and that will redirect you to the 15minutecorpwarrior.com. I still need to change that home domain because it's far too much of a mouthful. And I said that about 2 years ago. I'm awful. I'm always focusing on other things and not changing domains. But yeah, just search Skyler Tanner and you'll see the free. I think this is our third interview, isn't it? I think
this is our third interview.
So free will pop up, but the latest one. This one will be the first to appear. So Skyler, look, you've got to pick up your kids now, haven't you? Is that?
I get to go play daddy, and it's still 34 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So
beautiful.
It's gonna be cold.
Nice. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time. This evening in my time, GMT.
Yep.
And this was really interesting. I'm definitely going to re-listen to this one because some of the science, I'll be honest, does go in my head a little bit, and I need to listen to it again to understand it.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll send you a couple. I'll send you something about the functional as a meaningless word.
Yeah. And
if you have to ping me, please do. And also, I'm surprised nobody asked. I'm still only strength training once a week.
Yeah. There's a bunch of questions that I haven't asked you, but maybe we can do
round 4.
Either a round 4, or I thought it'd be quite a cool experiment is we could maybe do a bit of Q&A in the actual blog post if that's something you want to do, and we can sort of test out whether people like consuming some of that stuff that way, and it's also good for SEO as well. So
yeah, good for SEO, and it's good for me because my wife will tell you there's the point, and if you let me go, I'll just talk all around the point. So the blog post, my writing because of those the marketers have told Skyler, you got to get to the point. Skyler, get to the point. So it helps, and it'll help me to get to the point.
It's true, actually. Your writing is very succinct. I've noticed that. It's very. It's almost like. I personally think that you digressing occasionally and going off in tangents is fine, but your writing is almost the antithesis of your speaking.
It's taken a lot of work. And if you watch my presentations, my more recent presentations,
all right,
they've also gotten more succinct because of that. But you give me the forum, and I'll, I will just open the mouth and let it keep going.
It's passion. That's what it is.
Yeah, I love this stuff. I can't shut up about it.
Cool. All right, Skyler. Well, look, I'll leave you to it, but thanks again, and let's catch up soon.
Absolutely, Lawrence. Thank you so much.
Cheers, buddy. Take care.
Bye. Take
Bye.
care.
This episode is brought to you by hituni.com. If you haven't been a long-time listener and had the upsides of high-intensity training drilled into your brain, HIT has dramatically reduced my exercise volume to sub 30 minutes per week while helping me build more muscle and reduce my body fat to 10%, which in turn has enabled me to do more with my time, like play sports that I love, build businesses, and play more Call of Duty. Who wouldn't want that? So what has this got to do with Hit Uni? HitUni.com are providers of amazing online courses that teach you all about high-intensity training. There's a course for newbies that will show you how to optimize your workouts to build more muscle, burn more fat, and improve overall health. And the bulk of the courses are designed to qualify you to become a high-intensity training personal trainer and equip you with all the knowledge and business skills you need to build a successful fitness business. Hit Uni comes highly recommended by Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, Drew Bay, and Medex Precision Fitness owner Blair Wilson. It was founded by author and one of the UK's leading personal trainers, Simon Shawcross, who's been training people for 15 years and has supervised over 15,000 workouts. With help from contributors like Jimmy Moore, Dr. James Steele, and Edward Harrison, and inspiration from Arthur Jones, Dr. Ellington Darden, Ken Hutchins, Mike Mensa, Hit Uni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's an online support and discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. I personally used Hit Uni to build my own stunning physique, just kidding, but I have purchased a course to improve my understanding of HIT and improve my own results. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into these bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement as you tick off each one. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, choose your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support.